I'm here to talk about a little bit about the Atrato River. And the Atrato River, as Luis said, is one of the most beautiful places in Colombia and in the world, but it also encompasses a very complex combination of things. From being one of the five more biodiverse places on Earth, it has like 25% of the species only of plants and birds only grow in there. They are endemic. That's the word. I'm sorry. But you also have this amazing cultural diversity. There's indigenous communities, Afro-Colombian communities that have managed there to create their own systems of authority and their own systems of territorial administration, which is something really unique in the world. And it's the positive, but it's also the negative, because it has this, again, combination of external forces damaging it, all fueled by, the armed conflict and violence and human rights violations. But you have there the massive problem of illegal gold mining backed up by illegal armed groups. But then you add the illegal exploitation of food, also backed by illegal armed groups, and I can go mentioning drug trafficking and mentioning cattle ranches, and it's just a combination of things, and this river also has the privilege of being the third river in the world declared as a subject of rights, and this made it very famous on media and subject of rights in Colombia as a way to recognize nature in law. It's leading a process of expansion across the country. And Atrato was the first in Colombia to be the first entity in Colombia, the first natural entity to be a subject of rights, and it was probably the precursor of this whole movement. And that's a combination of complex things. And I want to talk about a little bit about that, about the sentence T622, which is the sentence that declared the river as a subject of rights. So how this sentence came about, I'm going to start on that. In the last 30 years, there's been an accumulation of problems that have generated a humanitarian crisis. The impacts to environment and the impacts to the social conditions and control conditions of people has had I mean, I don't know how to put this. The close relationship with people and river has broken up. Because they are not able to use the river, and the river is not able to provide food, provide the fishes that used to live there, to provide wood. And one thing to understand about the people of Atrato is that all the productive systems and all the cultural systems that they created through time were closely related to the rhythms of the river. So where they place the crops, or where they place the mining sites, or where they place the logging sites, all was related to the way the flood regime worked or the rain regime worked. They had to move it from site to site because it was a way to establish a cultural and productive system that respected, the environment. So in a way, the river itself shaped the way people live. And also people shaped the way the Atrato functioned, because for lots of years, these productoral systems these productive systems and cultural systems manage to conserve the territory, conserve the functional, the ecosystemical function of the river for years. But that relationship started to break down by the coming of the conflict. And the conflict came, and first of all, not to speak of the numbers of human rights violations that went on and that really weakened community living and the organizational process of local communities. But also these environmental impacts, have managed to create a situation of hunger. They are not able to feed themselves, and they are not able to roam freely the territory. So this accumulation of impacts started a process in the territory in Atrato. Local community organizations started talking about the way the river, about the impacts, about the way in which the impacts on the river were affecting the whole basin. So they realized they had a common problem that needed common solutions. So they came together and put together with a lot of allies a lawsuit to the government, denouncing the fact that this humanitarian crisis and this environmental crisis was, violating the rights of all people of Atrato. And the answer to that was the T622 sentence. So the first thing I want to point out here is that the process that generated the sentence was a bottom-up process. It was initiated by the people. So that is important to take into account, because that is a difference with other process of subject of rights that are going on in Colombia that are kind of top-down. There are a lot of other sentences or other government entities that are replicating this subject of rights formula without the social backup that it needs. Because what we found out is that a process as Atratos, the true strength is in what is in the organizational process and the local community process. And what do I mean by this? The sentence designated to local communities the duty of representing the river, because the river cannot speak for itself. And it was easy for the Constitutional Court to use already existing laws that provided local communities with the power to do this representation and to do the vote, and to give action to the voice of the river. If there wasn't that strong social process behind it, then the question would be, who is the voice? But here it was fairly easy just to designate, and that is what we call the body of guardians of the Atrato. The body of guardians of the Atrato is a representation platform made from 7 organizations of the territory, of local organizations of the territory, whose duty is to basically advocate for public policy to come to the region, but with a different approach, an approach that speaks to the way this territory lives in a day-to-day basis. And it created one of the most interesting figures, I think, in terms of the history of Colombia, because it created the Commission of Guardians, which is composed by local communities and government. And this institutionally backed figure implies something that is very novedoso, new,
Innovative.
innovative in terms of the political history of Colombia, that its main characteristics in its relation to local communities have been exclusion or not hearing the voice of the communities. Here you have probably the first, and it has no precedent, the first institutionally recognized figure where communities are at the same level of government. So we work along the community representatives in those dialogues with the government. And as you know, it's not an easy task, because as in any government or as in any society, there are multiple power relationships or political interests that make very difficult to make real what the law says, but the importance of this figure where communities are at the same level of government is really something that I really want to point out, because subject of rights tends to be the thing that is highlighted from this process, and it's important to highlight. But what I think is most innovative, although it may not seem as visible, is the governance process that the sentence allowed, because it created a governance system in which communities have the possibility of talk at the same level with the government. And I think that is probably, at least in my opinion, the most important aspect of this sentence. So it's a really interesting sentence, as you can see, because it combines the rights of nature component, but it also combines this really innovative governance approach. And the really interesting part also is that in Atrato, you cannot really understand why rights of nature are important if you don't understand the political, the organizational, and the community aspect of it, because it fits, the rights of nature fit on the relationship that people had with the river. And that is what the sentence recognized, that relationship. Because that relationship existed, then we should grant these right rivers to give people the possibility to defend it. So rights of nature are important, but there's another component that needs to be even more visible than it is, and it's the body of guardians of the Atrato. In terms of implementation of this sentence, it has various court orders that demand certain things, and it orders for an action plan to restore the environment, to restore the ecosystem. But it also orders for the recovery of certain productive practices that have been lost. And also, and very importantly, it demands the finalizing how do you call this thing? It demands for illegal mining to stop. Just to put it in easier words. The work that we do in SIEMBRA is work with the guardians of the Atrato, trying to implement these plans. And as you may know, a government is a monster with various heads. So there are certain things that are going really well, but there are some things that really need more support in order to make it better. The environmental aspect, it's really being addressed. With the guardians, we have managed to propose a way in which the government is gonna do that environmental recovery system through the communities itself. themselves. That is very important because we want that this process is fueled also by local knowledge. That is very important because local people know what type of plants you need to do a reforestation project better than any other person. They know exactly what are the sites that are optimal for reforestation because they've seen for a while that these sites are not to be mined anymore or belong to certain families, local families that are willing to put that site to reforestation. They know what site it's more optimal in terms of the flooding regime. So we really want to make it possible that this public policy fits a lot and goes through local community engagement, and hopefully that the communities themselves execute this type of environmental restoration. And as you may know, it's a huge battle because these are public resources, and in some of these countries like Colombia, corruption makes it's a huge component of the problems that are going on. So it's easier for a government institution at the regional level or at the local level to just do something that doesn't work but costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
And the idea and the fight, it's been to allocate these resources that are going to waste to projects that are executed by the community themselves, because it's not only fair, but it's also a practical matter. If you are gonna guarantee that this functions, you have to go through the people that know how to do it. So there's a hope in the environmental part. We've managed to talk to certain government agencies that are open to that, and it's been a long battle. I mean, we've been talking with these people for 8 years, and so there's comings and goings, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but we're there. At least there's an open channel of communication, which is guaranteed by the fact that there's this sentence. In the mining side, the situation is not as good. In the last 5 years, the areas affected by mining have grown almost 50 square kilometers additionally, if you know what I'm saying. And the channels of communication have not been fluid at all. Even though there's a sentence backing it up, those channels of communications have been blocked. And there's multiple reasons for it. One of them being that, mining creates a lot of money for a lot of people, including some government institutions or some members of the government institutions. So we haven't had an entire will to fight this type of this problem of illegal mining. And what I'm trying to say with this is that, a declaration of rights of a natural body, such as a river, in a place like Colombia is just the beginning of a much longer process. Everyone in Atrato celebrated the social organizations that led this process, celebrated as a victory, which is, the sentence. But we soon realized that it was just the beginning of a struggle, because what a sentence like this does is opening an opportunity. It opens a window, but there's no guarantee that something's gonna happen unless you have a social process that is willing to cross that window and fight the different components that need to happen in order to implement a sentence just as this, So in the end, rights of nature in a context like this, it's a tool. It's a tool that social communities need to use, because the granting of rights it's not a guarantee of anything happens. But in this case, it's a guarantee to open up a dialogue. And that's what the sentence do. It opens up the opportunity of a dialogue. That's why it's so important to strengthen the social process behind it. Because if you don't have a strong social process, that window of opportunity that the sentence opens up, it's just gonna close, or nobody's gonna dare to cross it. So I think that is why this process needs to be supported, because it's a very complex process that in order to give solutions, it probably needs to have every level of the Colombian state involved. From the national level, the presidency, all the ministries, to the local administration, to the local municipality. And also in a dialogue with different social processes. And there are so many things to be done that I can foresee this work continuing for at least 20 years, because there's a lot of things to change, because you have to understand that this law, Colombian law, but I bet systems of law in every country are not designed to have a river as its subject of intervention, and are not used to having local communities to have the power to stop an intervention. These are both things that are happening right now, but they have to fight with a long inertia of state action and a long inertia of different laws that contradict what is being trying to achieve. So every change that we are trying to push almost needs, by necessity, a radical reform in some way. Because if you're gonna fight off illegal mining, you need to do a big reform. If you wanna make possible for communities to execute reforestation process, you need a reform in the way budget is executed. If you need to restore the productive systems of local communities, you're gonna have to do a rework in the way this project conceives the uses of seeds, or the uses of land, or the uses of agrochemicals. And that means that not all fights are easy, because you're simultaneously having to deal with what is going territorially, but that it's a reflection of what is going at the national level, because it's such a new way of thinking about the territory and about people that you need to be dealing with the different levels. So to finish up, because I really wanted to give you context to have a conversation, I wanted to point out those two things that maybe don't come up as often in the discussion about rights of nature. Is that in the case of Atrato, there's a need for strengthening of local process and local organizations, and the real achievement of the sentence has been the ability to do that. And the second point I wanted to bring is that it's just the beginning. And if you don't manage to strengthen this organizational ethnic process, then the second component, which is the ongoing fight that needs to happen to make changes, it's not going to go nowhere, because you need to fuel it with the people that are allowed to establish these dialogues with government and push for all these reforms and push for a new type of public policy to to get to a region that really needs it. And for our people that have suffered a lot, but that still have hope and a good attitude that something is possible. So I would leave it there so we can start discussing.
Well, Rodrigo, thank you very much. I think it was really interesting.